Good evening, everybody. My name is Mike Maher. John was the best man in my wedding. He was indeed my best friend. But more importantly, he was undoubtedly the best man in my life. You know, Mrs. Dillon in the guest book wrote that, I kind of chuckled at this, said that John was an excellent Catholic. I don't know that I ever heard the word excellent and Catholic put together as an adjective, but it was very, very descriptive. For me, I like to describe John as a marvelous man. I marveled at John's perseverance, his courage, and his strength. You know, he fought this disease for 28 years, I think. Found out that he had contracted his cancer, and Kathy just found out that she was pregnant with the twins. Now, if you had told John that he lived 28 years, see grandkids, see kids get married, see kids get through college, I'm sure at that point he would have signed up for it. Never once did John complain. Never once. And more importantly, his faith deepened. Now, I know this human, there is no way my faith would have deepened. But John, I've never seen anything like it. But Father, some CC guys describe John as selfless. You know, right to the point, you know, when he was dying, he was asking about others. And he truly cared. Now, he'd ask me, because I had a brother-in-law that's got a warm heart, you know, how's Jeff doing? You know, now, I'm one guy. Yeah, I might be lucky enough to call John my best friend, and I'm sure he called me his best friend. But he'd ask me how Jeff was doing. But I'm sure there are many, many people in this room who felt the same touch, the same care. I also marveled at John's perseverance. You know, we talked about going into dental school together. And I'd go into pre-dent at Wayne State, and he'd go to U of M Dearborn. I took one sniff of college chemistry and physics and ran to business. John stuck with it, never asked me why I quit. You know, I just told him it wasn't for me. To this day, I kind of regret it. I wondered what it would have been like. I remember going into John's office at Cherry Hill and Outer Drive, right, for the first time. And again, you know, I marveled at how, you know, you go into a dentist office, you don't expect to hear laughing and jokes and fun. You know, I dread going to the dentist. I still do. But I went into his office, and he comes bounding out, not to see me, but to see other patients in the waiting room. I hear him back in the treatment room telling a joke. People are laughing. You know, and Kath, when I mentioned that a couple days ago, said, you know, they weren't patients, they were friends. You know, John treated everybody, you know, that way. So, and I marveled at his golf game. He loved that game. We had so many fun times up north. And he was in his element on the golf course. And he ruled Radrick Farms. I remember walking out with he and his buddies. We always called him just Gerard and Tony. You know, they'd be out there playing, and they're all calling him the Great Dilly. And he's out there listening to Rush Limbaugh on a transistor radio shooting par for the tips. You know, laughing the whole way for hours. And it was his element. He loved it. And he was so good at the game. It was amazing. And it was, you know, I was a slappy golfer, but I just loved to be out with him. And we had, you know, just incredible times growing up as young adults up north, playing, you know, wherever. You know, and this disease took that from him. You know, he had to convince himself that he didn't miss the game. But that was a sacrifice that he was willing to make as long as he could stay alive. He loved seeing, you know, everybody take up the game. The girls a little bit, Evan a little bit, Jack an awful lot. And he loved recounting rounds with Jack. He loved seeing him improve, getting to the point where he's now an accomplished golfer. John took great solace in that. He loved his CC classmates. You know, we had a chat group now of about 20 of us or so. Several are in the crowd. That only exists, I think, because of John. We went to a Hall of Fame dinner for one of the inductees. It was pretty sure it was Jeff Wiska's induction, and Jeff's here, I believe. He's right back there. And at that event, several people were there from the 77 class at CC, many of whom hadn't seen each other, or maybe remembered each other. It was kind of like a mini reunion. Well, John took the initiative to grab everybody's cell phones and emails and created a chat group that has now grown and reconnected people. You know, there's a kid in Alaska that went out right out of high school and, you know, stayed in touch with maybe a couple of guys. Now he's back in touch with dozens of classmates. And John was so instrumental in that. And the classmates all gave testament to John as he went through his struggles. And he'd ask, you know, he was even, you know, dying, and he's calling a buddy, Mark James, and asking how his wife's car is because the engine had gone bad. This is 3 weeks ago, you know, and he meant it. He really cared about what people's struggles were. And I just marveled at that. I marveled at his capacity for love. He loved his family. He loved his sibs, MB, Mo, and Andy. Loved his mom. And he beamed as grandkids were born. I think he couldn't believe that he was able to stay alive long enough to see those kinds of things. But again, as he went through all this stuff, never once did he complain. Never once did he ask, why me? And, you know, never once did he feel he got shortchanged. He accepted his lot in life and lived in it, you know, by example in a way that, you know, I think very, very few people could. So, you know, it's time for all of us to say goodbye to the earthly John. But he will be with us and with me for the rest of my life. He was was the very best friend anybody could ever have. So with that, if anybody else wants to come up and cry, you're more than welcome. Thank you very much.
It's harder. I'm saying something tomorrow, so I'll be pretty quick tonight, but a few things popped in my mind as I heard your beautiful comments, Mike. I've never met anyone that was more happy for you. Genuinely happy. Whatever good happened in your life. John, his sense of humor, it just never quit. We were in Hawaii, Maui, and the clerk thought John passed a counterfeit $100 bill. And so sure enough, the police show up, it's John and I, and my dad comes walking up, and there's this Hawaiian cop, looking up at John. And he's asking for all John's information, age, eye color, height. John's like 5'4". As my dad walks up, and he's like, my dad had no tolerance for messing with the authorities. John and Mike were an interesting couple. Just to tell you one quickie about Mike, I was a freshman when they were seniors, and I took typing class, so did Mike. John used to love to tell a story about, we had a whole assembly about a broken typewriter. No one could figure out whatever happened to it. Well, Mike got so frustrated typing that we're on the 3rd level of CC's old building down there, and Mike threw that typewriter out the window. And John said, like months later, you'd find the letter M. The best story, though, was the day that they went to see the last time the Montreal Canadiens played the Red Wings at Olympia Stadium. And I will really abbreviate a tremendous story. Someday, I'm sure it's recorded and you gotta listen to it, but Mike had had a few drinks and they had nowhere to sit. Mike got him in by yelling at the guard, and they decided, wow, we could sit on top of the private boxes. So John decides to get up there. He had to climb on the far side of the wall, walk over a beam, and then go on. And ice was right there. John says to Mike, it's great, come on up. So Mike, climbs up the wall, he's walking over. John sees the waiter who's been kicking him out of everywhere all night, turning the corner. He goes, John, Mike, the waiter's coming. So Mike immediately swings onto the top, goes right between two 2x4s, it falls through the roof, and knocks a guy down inside his private box. So that guy comes out, upset, and he's got dust this thick and drywall powder all over him. Mike starts yelling at him, making this guy feel bad, like it was his fault because the roof wasn't very strong. And that story ends with John at U of M Dearborn the next day at lunch, and he overhears 2 kids talking about the game. Did you hear about it? Yeah, there's even people on the top of the private boxes. They got away. But Mike, you were a tremendous friend for him, and I don't think any 2 people had more fun in the days that you guys were together. And John always included me with his friends. I mean, sometimes a big brother can give his little brother a hard time. That was very far and few between where John didn't welcome me into his groups and didn't take genuine happiness and pride in anything that could happen to me. And he was always there. I had a lot of moments in my life where I needed a friend, and he was always there. And he so gratefully found Kathy, and you guys, you 4 are blessed to have known him. And I loved watching watching you guys the last couple of weeks. You got to say goodbye. It was really goodbye. So we're gonna miss John Boy, but no one would be happier than him if he would smile and be happy and tell a few jokes today. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm nervous, but I'll do this for John. So I gotta tell.
Yourself.
What's that?
Identify yourself.
Oh, I'm Gabriel Egan. I'm Maureen's son, John's nephew. I gotta tell one quick story before I tell the story about John. I was 16, so it'd been like 2006. Andy had got a place on Higgins Lake, and it was kind of a quasi reunion. It wasn't really an official one, but like parents were coming up and down, kids were there, and kind of leads to the story. There's lack of adult supervision. So to make a long story short, like I said, I was 16, my brother Dan was 18, and we started sneaking a few beers here and there. And being the older cousins, that kind of fell on us to be the good example. We were not those couple days. So the first night, we took a couple beers, no big deal. And then the second night, I think we got a little greedy. And then I can't remember exactly, but the third night, I think the parents caught on. Sorry, MB, a lot of Oberons were gone. Long story short, we got a lot of trouble. Me especially, being one of the older cousins. And I felt really bad about it. Not being the example for my cousins there. And we had a good time, but being the older cousin kind of falls on you to kind of set that example. So fast forward a couple weeks, I was kind of on eggshells at home. I can't really remember exactly, but I just remember there was a lot of tension, my parents being, disappointed in that. And so we go to Kathy's place in Ontario. And I remember John, I don't think was at Higgins Lake, but he knew what happened. And he's like, Gabe, you want to go on the boat? And I was like, yeah. And I think it was just Jack and maybe Evan, but it was not many people on the boat. I could tell he wanted to talk to me, and I'm really nervous. And like I said, for the 2 weeks before that, I've been pretty nervous leading up to that. And then I think either Jack or Evan were on the tube, so it's just me and John on the boat, and I'm just dreading this. I'm like, John's gonna lay into me, all this stuff, and I can't remember exactly what he told me, but all I can say was like the level of compassion and just looking out for me. It didn't come across as like heavy-handed or stern. I remember just feeling very relieved, but he got his point across. It was like, Gabe, like, you're a great kid. We expect a lot of you, and just being like a good example for your cousins. And nothing about it was like disciplinary or, like I said, heavy-handed. And it just showed to me, how much he cared about all of us, and just that, he had our best intentions in mind, and also he knows we're going to screw up once in a while. And I always remember that. I've been thinking about John a lot, this whole year, and that's one thing that really stuck out, because no one saw that. It was just me and John, and I'll never forget that. And I loved your dad. I always love your dad. John was the best. Go Blue.